Hello, you're watching a video about a Pacific Polar Bear 600 reloading press, circa somewhere probably in the 1970s. This is a 6-station semi-progressive press, as in you have to move the shells yourself, but you keep the shell plate full of shells or holes. This is the predecessor to the Hornady 366, which is still in production. And this is just going to be a little walkthrough video to show you what this thing is about, capable, and if you had one, whether you'd want to try to fix it or not. Any parts that you see on this that have that kind of a blue, that kind of look, those are 3D printed. If you're not doing 3D printing, I highly recommend it for hobby. You can do, well, literally anything you can imagine, pretty much you can print if you keep the scale reasonably. So this is, let's see, I have an ad for it, apparently out of the Shooter's Bible. Just a copy of an ad I took off of eBay, and you can pause it and look at that. That gives you an idea of what they thought of it. They say that this thing can print, or not print, it can load up to 600 rounds per hour. That's pretty aggressive, but you might be able to if you had someone helping you out with primers or something, or if you had a bunch of spare primer tubes. For information on the web, there's not a lot. There are some old clay shooters that are still using these. They think the world of them. I mean, it is a pretty good press, and it's, you know, having to do this after each stroke isn't that big of a deal as far as this versus a progressive. The crimps this thing is capable of are pretty decent. The blue Remington case on the left is factory, on the right came off of this press. I mean, those are pretty decent crimps. Of course, most of your better, newer presses are going to also have there's going to be a pre-crimp and a crimp die, and then a final crimp, which is just basically, when you rub your fingers on this, you can feel a little bit of bulge at the top of the case where it's coming out a bit because of all that flaring that's going on. Whereas in the factory case, it's a little more rounded right there. You just don't get that same feel. But that could be an issue, I guess, if you have a semi-auto shotgun that you're running, or it may not be. Some people say that it doesn't have really an effect. As far as info on the internet, if you go to their Pacific, although apparently Bair was, or no, Pacific was purchased by Bair, and then Hornady purchased Bair, and there's still a Pacific reloading, or a Pacific division with Hornady. Probably wrong, but I think that's what's going on. And they have a tool company forum where they have old presses that they made, and this isn't the same press as this. This is the DL360, and one of the big differences is that this one doesn't have a swing out wad holder like this press here does. Swing out as in drop your wad in, pull the handle, it goes into position. So likely when you so anyway, this has pretty good information. It you know, gives you how to adjust it and some troubleshooting guides. And they don't actually have this manual there. I just copy and pasted the information that they had for this tool into Word and then printed it just for personal reference. So let's look at the stations on this thing, and so station number 1 or 1A is just sizing. Stick the case either down there or shove it into it, pull the handle down, and it'll generally partially pop down depending on the type of crimp. Sometimes it'll fall out, and then it would go to station 1. You might choose to size everything before you go through the individual stations. This first station is just a depriming station. It's just exactly what you'd expect. You could machine any kind of metal that goes and does kind of this, and you'd probably be fine. The next station is priming, and priming is, let me get it in frame. If chances are this little plastic piece on you is going to fail, I had to print a new one. This took a ton of time to figure out. It's a 6-degree angle, an inward angle towards the base plate, and how it works is down here. Let me move in a little closer, sorry for the movement, but when it comes down, I'm going to have to adjust that a little bit. As it comes down, there'll be a primer hanging in there, and that little paw is going to touch that plate and open up. Primer pops in the hole. It works really well if it's an adjustment. And when I'm talking about adjustment, I mean that little plastic thing. 6-degree angle. I'm going to upload all the plastic that I printed on this onto Thingiverse, and then you won't have to figure out these angles and so on and so forth. You just simply print. At most you have to size it in your slicer. In other words, make it 99% as tall as it was, or what have you. You can change dimensions easily with a 3D printer. So so it sets a primer. We'll do one. Let me grab a primer and then we'll drop it in there. So primer is now, is it there? Oh, I got a pen in, hold on. There it is. Okay. So we now have primer at the bottom there. So let's try doing that last action again. Pull the handle back, arm's going to come into shot. Okay, it comes down. There's the primer. Okay, and so when you put the next case in and then you rotate it, it's going to drop into that little hole there. Now the primer is sitting up like that, and it's waiting to get squished onto a case. Now there's a couple really important things about this particular station, the priming station proper. It has to sit low enough where a case can go over it without disturbing it. And if it's sitting high, the case can wipe it and push it so that it's, instead of going straight in, it's at an angle. And when that happens, when you raise the press, eventually the primer will be raised, see, there we go, and pressed into the case. And if it's laying sideways, it will hit the bottom of the case, and it'll either snap into the case, popping powder onto your top here, which everybody hates that, and possibly some shot gets lost, because about at the same time that it's fully seating it, it's dumping powder. The second thing that can happen is it doesn't get in there really well until the very, very end, in which case you have a bunch of powder sitting down here that's spilled from the bottom of the case. So you'll have an undercharged case and a big mess that you may not discover for a while, so your next rounds, your next primers will be sitting on some powders they're trying to be seated. It just turns into a mess, and so your 600 rounds per hour that you're supposed to be able to do on this drops to like maybe 60. So there were a couple of issues with that station, so let me go into some detail about it. On the underside, there is, I gotta drop my camera low, this will take a second. Okay, let me get under it. Down we go. On the underside, I don't know if we'll be able to see up there or not. So on the underside, you have an arm. This arm, trust me, it just simply toggles, but it has the ram for the primer. This is not working out. Okay, I'm going to carry the camera for a second. So, on the underside, it's going to get bouncy, sorry. There's an arm, 3D printed chute for primers that go into 3D printed box back there. Okay, so we have this arm here, and that arm pushes up against the primer, and the primer seater, and there's a ram, of course, for the primer seater. That ram there has a spring that holds it down, and so in theory, when the press is down low like it currently is, when it's down low like that, the seater ram, it's dropped low enough in there where the primer, when it falls into that hole, it has no choice but to fall flat. There's no other way for it to fall. If it's sitting a little high though, the primer may never actually fully fall into it. It might be just sitting at an angle, or again, if it's sitting too high, you'll get wipes. Well, the problem is that there's a spring under there around that ram, and that spring is really, really tired, and I couldn't find anything similar at the local hardware store to replace it. I did put a washer in there to make the spring think that it's a little bit longer, but if I put two washers in there, it pops them off, so apparently there's an interference issue. So what I had to do was go to the back of the press. This rod here, that's encapsulated with the spring, this is what actually causes the arm to pivot right there. So if I can get an action shot of that, and it goes up, eventually it gets pushed down. Okay, and so what I ended up doing was adding a spring here, this little spring near the nut adjustment, this little spring here, to just hold. All this spring's actually doing, it's way overkill, but I had limited selection. It's just keeping, you know, that from touching that. So that allows the primer ram here to stay down low enough to stay out of the way. So that's something you may have to deal with, you know, and that's a problem that's developed over 30 years of sitting. Just from sitting, all those years of sitting, that spring in here got tired. So, but I had to add a part, which adds complexity, so I didn't like that, but you know, I don't have the original spring sitting around. Alright, so what's the next station? The next station is just simply primer, or pardon me, powder right here, powder cone drop. And the cone for the powder is the same as the cone for the shot, which is the back cone back here. Basically this is just like a Hornady 366, or I should say the Hornady 366 is just like this as it comes. That little slot pulls the powder bar back and forth, dropping powder. There's no shut off on this. You could probably 3D print one, but that's how that mechanism works. And it dumps powder, you can see, just about the time that the primer is coming up. That's about when it's starting to dump powder on you. The next location on this is the WAD seating location, and there's several things going on here. First of all, this platform is spring loaded. I don't know if, let's see if I can get it. Spring loaded, so if I press my thumb, there's a little round thing here with the spring on it. If I press on it, I didn't know, wrong location, I'll never get it to move like that. Okay, so there was some movement there. You have to push pretty hard. And so all that mechanism is literally it's just a piece of plastic that's printed with a cylinder that's just fat enough to poke up into the hole on the bottom of this. Comes across to a pointer that actually does line up pretty close to zero. The original one I think was just folded metal. They'd come down here, do a 45-degree fold over, and then they probably had a piece of metal coming up, and then they, what did they do with that? They rolled it so that it was round. The advantage of that design over this design is if shot or powder fell into that little hole, it would just fall to the bottom, so that's probably a superior design to this plastic one. But the plastic one works. Okay. But it's a very simple mechanism. Next thing is the swing out wad holder. At the bottom I have a little piece of plastic that attaches to this post and then goes behind, and that's where the spring attaches. And the only reason for that is that if I put the spring where it's supposed to be on this post, there's almost no spring pressure, so it'll only swing this thing about that far, because the spring is old and tired. If I wrap it an additional wrap around, it works fine, but the spring pressure is extreme, and I'm afraid it's going to break the spring. So I just made a little plastic cheater. It absorbs very little pressure, so it should last. And the thing is with 3D printing, like when you print these things, why not print 2 or 3 extras at the same time? This is probably a 15-minute print or less, so you know, you print your spare parts. If it breaks, you have to put another one in. Next thing was this wad guide holder. Getting the dimensions just right took quite a bit of time. It's press fit together. I might make it threaded, I'm not sure. It's pretty solid. You have to really work to take it apart. It uses the Hornady wad fingers. I've read that if you have the original, yours will probably come with the original. This guy just lost this one that I bought it from. You know, I took it apart, set it on his workbench, and 20 years later it's not there no more. You know, kind of not a big surprise, right? But apparently they originally had metal guides that were just a pain in the ass to use. Like he told me to get 5 or 6 extra, not just 1 or 2. But that's not the case. The plastic ones are better, and apparently the plastic ones do work just fine in the old holders. So, anyhow, when you're designing this, the bottom is actually more narrow than the cup part. So, so a little bit of light sanding on it until it goes in, but you don't want it to fall back and forth. You pull the handle, it swings into position. The mechanism on this press is up here. It's just a, there's a ramp built into that, a circular ramp, and it's got a pin in the rod, across the rod, so when, so let me zoom in maybe. So that's a ramp, that part that's poking up. When that thing drops down, it's going to touch that ramp and spin. That's all it takes, just a little bit of spin. It doesn't really matter where you adjust it on that ramp for up and down, just as long as it can spin when it hits that ramp. Then of course you'll time this thing so that at the bottom, the wad holder, come out a bit, the wad holder is pointing out towards you. That's where you would like it to be resting, so that you can stick your next wad into it. And again, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the 366s, they actually incorporated that at the bottom instead of at the top on the underside. And there's a guy who I think he's a gunsmith, and he did a bunch of videos on updates that he's making to his older 366s to be current with the current Hornady 366s, and he shows extensively how you can do that on that press, and if you want to understand that mechanism a little bit better. So the wad seater's pretty standard. It's just goes into the hole, pushes wad into case. Wad eventually gets pushed down here. We can do it like this even. Oops, show that on screen. Wad eventually pushes through, squishes into case, pushes down, and supposedly you want to see a little bit of deflection on this so you know that it's truly bottomed out. And of course, every time you're pulling the handle, you're moving, adding a case in, coming like that, pulling the case out, putting a new case in, doing that sort of thing. So your actual reloading process is you're going to stick a case there, put a wad there, pull the handle down, go like that, advance the platform, pull a loaded case out, stick a new case in, do it again. And if your primer isn't dragging, if your alignment here is good, it's about that fast. Let's see what's next. And so back here we have pre-crimp. So I've kind of skipped over this location. You pull the handle, and just like powder, shot's going to drop onto hopefully a wad that you remember to stick into it. Then you advance it to there. Now you got your pre-crimp, and the pre-crimp is one of these. I machined this guy yesterday. So and it's just, it spins, and this is a Hornady part. And the Hornady parts that they sell for this, like they have a kit that has the 3 different styles. This one is a 6, and then there's an 8, and then there's a smooth interior one, which is for paper, and I think final crimp too. Those parts, the converter fits the Pacific press, this press perfectly. So in fact, that's a Hornady setup right there. The stuff's in black because I blued it. When it comes from Hornady, it's going to be a shiny silver. So anyhow, and I made this one just so I wouldn't have to take the end off and be adjusting it and so forth. But that's how it basically works. Oh, it's the center screw is a 1032. The thread in here is 9/16 by the thread pitch was 9/16 by 18 turns per inch, which I think that's a standard. I think 20 is the oddball, but it is an 18 turns per inch. Almost blew it right there. So anyhow, so I think that's pretty much it. This uses standard Hornady bushings. I think the Pacific bushings that I had for the powder anyway fit the bushing bar just, you know, maybe a thousandth of an inch better fit. But absolutely it's in there good. So I printed these, I designed these, what are the powder and shot baffles. Supposedly as your shot column's high, right, there's more pressure going down, but as your shot column or your powder becomes lower, there's less pressure. Well, this will kind of hold things up so that it's more of an even thing. People generally agree that these things work, and I know, like on my Dillon presses, excuse me, on my Dillon presses, it does definitely improve consistency in your powder drops. These tubes, though, are 30 years old, and they have a lot of signs of wear. There's holes in these that have been ripped out as though they were at one time mounted down here and this thing was dropped or something. What a mess. But the tubes, the inside diameter is not consistent on the tubes, probably because of age. So you notice that there's powder there. There's nothing you can do about it. When I shoved them in from the top, it was a tight fit. So and I think on this one that had been holding shot for all those years, it's even worse. Or one of them was quite a bit worse than the other. So and it's a debate whether these help you out at all with shot throws or not. Be sure you weigh your shot throws. Just because a bushing says it's 1 1/8, it has a lot to do with the size of the bushing or the size of the shot you're running. Like if you're throwing a consistent 1 1/8 with number 8 shot, you go to a number 6 shot, you may need to use a 1 1/4 ounce bushing to get a number, to get number 6, for example, to drop 1 1/8. And one thing about this manual this short little manual thing that I printed, they have shot recommendations. This is old and outdated information. If you look at current manuals and you see and you compare the bushings versus the powder, these are wildly, some of these anyway, are wildly different from current load data, so I would not use this chart at all. The manufacturing has changed in the last 30 or 40 years, 40 years probably for this press, certainly for that one. So I hope this helps someone. I had trouble using this little clicker thing. It has a, hold on, sorry, I'm doing this all freehand. So it's got a little thing there that rotates, drops, sit it up there in theory, and it drops one chill down, or one primer down every time you turn the handle. I use a little pin with it instead, and so I drop primers into this thing off press, then put this thing on the press and pull the pin. I found anyway with Winchester 209 primers that, I mean, you really have to baby this thing. I don't think this one's, maybe the plastic dimensions have changed a little bit over the years, or maybe primers have gotten a little bit taller. I know this is still in current production, although I doubt if it has that Bair symbol on it. But it didn't work very well trying it on the press. In fact, I ended up making a huge mess. So, but it is available. I didn't really